So somebody asked me a little while ago why am I in my bio associated with Jamaica since I'm Ghanaian. Well, you know, I grew up there. And my father was Jamaican, although interestingly, he was actually born in Nigeria to Jamaican parents who, at the turn of the last century, traveled to Nigeria and lived there for about 15 to 20 years. So my father was born there, which is an interesting time because this is Garvey days, and they were from St. Anne. And British colonialism is a very shrewd, diabolical operation. So they were having trouble in Nigeria. Not surprising. So one of the brain waves that they had was that if they could get people from the Caribbean, black people, to go there to do some of the work that they wanted to do, it would work out fine. What they didn't realize is that many of those Jamaicans who decided to go there had already been inculcated into the idea that Africa is their homeland. So many of them agreed to do it, including my grandfather and his brother and so on. And so they did it and created this interesting conversation between Jamaica and Nigeria, which hasn't been talked about or spoken about, where they exchanged agricultural practices, marketing practices, and so on and so forth, going back and forth. It's actually quite fascinating. So, and then I was, of course, born in Ghana. My mother is Ghanaian. So I come to my multiple identities legitimately. So fortunately, that story is a good way to introduce Sturgetown. Sturgetown is a small village in Jamaica, in St. Anne, in the hills of St. Anne. Sturgetown is one of those free villages, and I don't know what you know about the free village, but as soon as slavery was over in Jamaica and in the Caribbean, in the British Caribbean, this was 1838. Well, you know, the British started a thing earlier and then said, we would indenture you for a few years because the planters were having such a hard time with the end of slavery. It was just so difficult for them. You know, because what are they going to do? These slaves are leaving. Oh my God. So to appease the planters, they decided to have this indentured period. But unfortunately, word got around to the slaves, the enslaved people, and they said, yeah, right, no, we're not doing that. So that's why slavery ended when it did, because the indentured thing just couldn't hold up. People just left. So one of the things that happened was that many of the ex-slaves left the plantation and formed communities, villages, with funding from anti-slavery movements in the UK. And Sturgetown was one of those villages. So in a sense, it's an ancestral village for me, because that's where my great-great-grandfather existed, grew up, and so on and so forth, after leaving the plantation. So this collection is looking at home, identity, and place. So I'm just going to read a few poems from Sturgetown. This is the title poem, Sturgetown. 1. In this fantasy of homecoming, the termites, out of respect, have vacated the elegant homestead of delicate filigreed panels and jalousies that speak of a century ago and allow the trees to crowd in and shelter the graveyard, the pimento barbecue, and the porch until the return. Of course, the house is rotting, the squatters abandoned it for better walls, and the prodigals have not returned. 2. For too long I spoke of return, a kind of prodigal fantasy. Although face set against the sun, I had abandoned the waywardness of the failed son. My father is long dead, and I was faithful to the last. Still, Post-colonial that I am, I built my own myth of departure, set aside the romance of the exile for the pragmatics of family and mission. Return was to what might have been had my ancestors lived longer, had they held on to the cottage on the hill, to Sturge Town's pimento barbecue decks, the green of an island's history marching along the narrow paths of the enslaved, trotting to the cane fields. I return as one who visited once. Still, my heart goldens in warmth to see the gray slab with Dawes etched into stone. That's the first piece. Thank you. Thank you. So, just let you know that children, when they start crying, if there are other children, they'll pick it up. So we might start hearing a whole symphony of empathetic weeping. I'm peculiarly anticipating this with some relish. Okay. So we continue with this. So this is a poem called It Bruises Too. And there's a follow-up poem called It Bruises Too. So that may come later on if I have time. If I don't have time, you're stuck with It Bruises Too alone. And then that's the point at which I say, well, if you really want to hear it, buy the book. But this is not a ploy. I intend to read it, but I'm just saying, if I happen to not get to it, I will say, buy the book. So, It Bruises Too. Find words to describe the stone heavy in the bowels, the disasters we make of our lives, the haunting that has killed before. You find me a clumsy journeyman on a road that curls across green plains. You'll see me with my staff from many miles away. I follow the contours the mountains make of the road until hours later, after 2 light showers and a burst of sunlight, we meet. I tell you I'm doing penance and swear that the words I'm speaking are the breaking of a long fast, that my voice sounds alien even to me. You ask why I wince like that. The silence, I say, it bruises too. Then, after the elation of this meeting, we part, you towards the light, me into the gloom you left behind. Thank you. Now, into some family poems. I'm going to read a series of family poems. This is from a sequence called Decubitus in 5 frames. And it's sort of for my wife's grandmother. I think I got that right. My wife's grandmother from St. Catherine. She lives in St. Catherine. She lived in St. Catherine. This is a piece called Balm in Gilead. It's the 5th of the sequence. I'm just reading the 5th part. In Sandygot, St. Catherine, a gloomy cottage stands at the foothills of the grand mountains that swallowed slaves. It's where my wife's ancestors walked barefoot all her life, her soles callous to a hardened armor, her toes pliable as fingers, could grip stones and shatter pieces of wood. She climbed coconut trees well into her 70s, her skirts hem hitched into her waist, her legs sinuous, rippling with efficiency. Descending quickly, she panted briefly as if to cover the shame of gawkers, quickly peeling away the copra with a machete to find the seed. Those hands gathered bush, calling their names as if praying. I fantasize her voice saying, okay, ready. With that gentle impatience that is a blood trait my wife has inherited. I enter the gloom, see the mist rising up from the porcelain bath, set there in the middle of the dirt floor. She nods to the stool I sit. But wait, how you can be it like so? The teeth hiss rolling into a deep belly chuckle. I strip. She turns and squats before me, takes my feet in her hands with rough assuredness, and with a rag she cleans the decades of wayward and unrighteous paths I have walked, cleans all falsehood, myths, betrayals, all acts of foolishness, decades of them. She stands, and I know to enter the water bare as I am, the thick scent of mint and astringent green overwhelming me. Her voice, her breath, her prayers, her patience, her sweat, her hands, yes, her hands of command are laid on me until I fall into a stupor, the comfort of ritual, the healing I have longed for. So, that is for... There's a poet called Romeo Oriogun, a Nigerian poet, and he had a phrase that says we should care for our ancestors, which is an interesting way of thinking about it, the care we have for our ancestors. And I think there's absolute truth in that. Here's a kind of love poem. It's called Fishing. It's not about anybody I know, or anybody you know I know. I say this officially every time I read it because of the internet. It's, sometimes you just make up stuff, and so I made it up. So here's a section. I won't read the whole thing because, of course, then it won't sound made up, even though it's made up. But so I'll just read one section of the piece, and it's the last section, and it's called Addiction. Maybe I won't read Addiction. I think I'll come before that. Yeah, I think I'll read Addiction. No, I'll go back. You have to watch these things, Yeah, okay, I got it. So this is a piece called Getting There. And getting there, yeah. So every suggestion, it's sensual. So any suggestion of sensuality is not accidental. Yeah, okay, just clarifying. I mean, in case you're puzzled, and if you don't understand, then it's not your time yet. Your time will come, I can tell you that. Okay. Stay pure. All right, so this is based on a painting by John Sargent called Paul Hele Sketching with His Wife. So that's the painting that this poem is based on. Here we go. Getting there. He rose alone, planting smooth, worn wood smooth, softly into the current. He's mesmerized by the sound of water parting, the whisper it makes against the weathered flanks of the boat. She stares into the sky, holding close to her chest the damp paddle. It soaks into the fabric, then into her skin. Her pout is gone. She's cold already. Fight no longer sustains her. He grunts. We are fighting the order of things. You keep losing the rhythm. We will go in circles if you don't let me do it. How can she say to this logic, I dreamt we were doing it together. I saw us moving with something delicious, the pull and tug of lovers. I imagined us cutting the surface like this, or at least trying and laughing about it. So he does. And at last the romance. A lazy summer dusk, the moon growing over the swamp's edge, the water near tippet, a sullen, amiable sluggishness, the straw hats, the red ribbons, the sports jacket, the white skirt, the satchel of paints and brushes, the accoutrements of a picnic, the orderliness of a boat drifting across a placid lake, the pewter and sepia rocks to the side. Then she says, no, you do it, I will watch. He will ask her if she's happy, if she enjoys the water, the view, if she found his landscape, the humid watercolor of a stunted dogwood, lovely to her liking. She hears, did you come? And she answers, as always, with faith, it was lovely. You were lovely. For that is enough. She's holding the paddle to her breast, the hard handle pressing a nipple. It will leave a mark on her skin. There we go. It's all right. And if anybody asks you, how was the reading, what will you say? It was lovely. You were lovely. Dear. So I have 3 offspring. I don't call them children anymore because they're grown-ass people. But, so I have 2 daughters, and they flank a son. And they're sort of late. They're in their 30s now, I guess, all of them. My children and my poetry have a very interesting relationship. So the most exciting thing that they do around my poetry is, unfortunately, not read it, but argue about who gets, like mentioned in the poems the most. So my joy is to encourage this argument. So I dedicate some poems to some, like I'm watching the numbers. They think I'm just doing it through my inspiration. But this is a poem for both my daughters, and all of this introduction is funny. The poem is not funny at all. The poem is actually quite sad. But, it's your children, so even then it's kind of funny. But there's a funny part to it. But it's called It Begins with Silence. And this is for Senna and Ekwa, my 2 daughters. And there's an epigraph from Dana Rothberg, and it is, the womb of the woman is the universe, the dark space where all things begin and get completed. The womb of the woman is the universe. My daughters, I will save you the trouble of finding words for that meeting in the darkness. Of my eyes not discerning you, my gentle request that you take my hands to your faces to trace a memory of love, the smile, the giggle in the shape of your lips. My daughters, perhaps this will be the register of the dark and light of last meetings, those repeated again and again, and you will, I hope, walk into a long dusk and light, perfect in its tenderness, your ordinary, mundane conversations about money, vacations, work, your brother, your mother's anticipated questions. This poem, I hope, will save you the scent of my body decaying, the things I will keep about me, the forgiveness, perhaps, of what you will know and not know before you separate, drive towards your own futures. On my walks, I'm carrying you in my head, the mantra of wished-for things, the prayer for your laughter to never end, but to grow and grow in the soft depth of contentment, the tenderness of your delight in open skies, the way you return to the womb of belonging, that you will know the persistence of being loved, the art of family, remembering the dates, the anniversaries, the absurd details, the lies we treat as games, knowing that lies of the deepest wounding are healed in the shadow of wombs, the unreachable places that make the beginning and end. It begins with silence. It begins with water. It begins with shadow. Poem for that. Thank you. And here's a poem for my son. My son is Kikeli. It's called Fish, Serpent, Egg, Scorpion. And there's a scripture, how fitting, from Luke chapter 10, verse 12. And this is the scripture. This is Christ speaking. For everyone who asks, receives. He who seeks, finds. And to him who knocks, the door will be opened. What father among you, if his son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? There were no tears, but as is the commotion of these emotional days, the impetus for tears. When I said to him, there in the cold street, our bodies held by the sporty winter jackets, I am your gift, this body before you, still here to say, let's take a walk, son. Me, this complex of secure love. I'm not your enemy, not a murky pond of dangers. Don't you know that when I was your age, my hunger for a shelter in a man's heart was already dust? He was dead, gone, and all I had was the surrogate of his letters, the clues of his narrative of love in his fiction and poems, the snippets of affection from his old friends. Hardly enough, but all I had upon which to build an edifice of meaning. And I wrote then, world, world, world that I have lost, full of every melodrama of mourning, though it was never hyperbole, never a lie. I said to him, so here I am. And my voice was phlegmy and earnest. Here I am for you, so use me, feed on me. I'm your father, use me. Perhaps we must all say this, or have thought to say this, we who father sons. Maybe every poem has its own ancestry, but this was us, me, embracing him and him saying, sorry, Dad, I know. And even now, it breaks me that I could present him with my body, my mortality, my leaving him, that I would let him feel the start of his long mourning before it has to come. I said, I could die today, not as hyperbole, but as a truth that runs through my veins, my lungs. This is love then, a father and a son, him handsome, fluid, tender, the boy and man, all there, and me mourning for his bereavement. It was a passing thing. We re-entered the house with the noises of the season, laughter, as if that moment between us could be set aside. Of course, we know it will not be. I know that this father must say again and again, I'm made for you, and I will not promise you a fish and then hand you the threat of a serpent. So it turns out what we were discussing, and I use the word discussing very euphemistically, was when was he going to propose to this wonderful Michelle? I thought he was. So I'm saying like that's that was his response. So we were arguing about that, and finally I said, it's time, but I'm not your enemy. So at this last calabash, he did. So so it worked out. Oh, and she said yes. So that's also handy. Yeah, because we just assume, right? No, she did say yes. But then I paid her enough to do that, so that was all right. I'm going to end with, guess what? It bruises too, after. Remember that part I told you about, right? So, and I read this poem, the image of that poem, It Bruises Too, is a moment, sometimes when you're in Jamaica and in the hills, like in the Blue Mountains, the roads are all windy and you move around, right? And you can literally you can see on one point in the road a good distance away because but it takes you a while to get there. And so I imagine something that I remember seeing when I used to run up the hills. I actually used to run. How long it took me to see. I'll see somebody and then I'll see them again after a while. So after It Bruises Too, then began to think about a different perspective for the poem, of a drone watching us. And that drone, that seeing eye, is both a powerful idea in our world today. And that's the turn where the poem changes. So after It Bruises Too, 1. Under a peace-loving drone's gaze, purring its presence above it all, not seeking to startle, the drama enacts itself. Two bodies walk a mountain road towards each other, appearing and disappearing behind its slopes, bends, and contours, until after the squall and the bright light and deep shadow of moving clouds, after an hour or so, they meet without fanfare, pause, and then continue again. I know, as does the controller, thumbing the drone's throttle, that were either of them to gaze upwards, the sight of this object eyeing them from above would terrify with the superiority of its far-seeing eye, the eye of the poet, and the disquiet of being a small creature moving slowly through the world from shadow to light. 2. This vision collapses into the Kingston memory of a hawk's mothering scream diving towards my bare head, the dizzying feeling tethering me to the earth. We watch the destruction of bodies and streets from the bloodless gaze of the drone's eye. We make games of our terrors, nightmare our ends in the inexorable zooming in of the eye towards the target, towards the tower, towards the factory, towards the church, towards all these continuing on in a loop again and numbingly again until all terror is siphoned from our world. I keep returning to the memory of imagining a meeting from so far above of two people walking on their pilgrimages and meeting at the point of accidental intersection, pausing, exchanging pleasantries and prayers and blessings, and then moving on, wondering if love, perhaps repeated, could be the new healing. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out. Bless you.
Wow.